Greetings everyone. Today I want to tell you about the Battle of the Blankets. So this is one of those interesting little battles that most Americans have never heard of. In fact, this battle takes place during a war that many Americans have never heard of. So in the year 1700, the King of Spain, Charles II, he died without an heir. And this always caused problems in Europe because everybody's going to fight over the throne. And the King of France at the time, Louis XIV, he decided he was going to put his grandson on the Spanish throne. And of course, other great powers of Europe didn't want this to happen. And so this led to a big war called the War of Spanish Succession. In America, this war is known as Queen Anne's War. And Queen Anne's War has a northern theater and a southern theater. So there's a lot of fighting happening up north and in New England against the Canadian provinces that were owned by the French. But we also have fighting in the south, and that's what we're going to talk about today, because that's where this Battle of the Blankets takes place. The place that we're standing right now, this used to be a no man's land. Okay, this was a area that was claimed by both England and Spain, and therefore it was a war zone. We're talking about the area between the Savannah River and the St. Johns River, so South Georgia, North Florida. This was an area that, Spain had claimed it as part of La Florida. And then, of course, as the English colonies continued to grow south and they settled in Charlestown, which became Charleston, South Carolina, they were fighting over this region. And both sides, the Spanish and the English, had Indian allies. And a lot of these Indians had long-standing rivalries. So these Indians were at war with each other before Europeans came, but Europeans exacerbated the violence that was, pre-existing in the colonial South. This particular battle, the Battle of the Blankets, takes place along the Flint River in South Georgia. Okay, and what happened here? You have a group of about 1,500 English allied Indians. Okay, these are primarily Creeks, Westos, Chiscas. And you have a couple of Englishmen, about 3 Englishmen that we know of were in this battle, and also 2 Africans who were with this English party. So we have, roughly a force of 1,500 English, African, and Indians that are all allied with the English, but the force is primarily Native American or Indian, right? At the same time, we have a force of about 800 Spanish allied Indians. And these Spanish allied Indians, they're comprised of Apalaches, Timucuas, Choctaws, and they are, allied with Spain. And this group also has about 30 Spanish soldiers, 30 Spanish infantrymen. So in both cases, we have, Europeans and Indians together. And of course, they are enemies, all right? Now, that English force, that force of about 1,500 English allied Indians, they are armed with Indian trade guns. All right, and this is kind of what you see here. I did a video about the Indian trade gun, so if you haven't watched that video, please go watch it. It'll explain a lot more of this in detail. I'm not gonna, reiterate all that stuff, but so the video, the significance of the Indian trade gun, that'll kind of set the stage for this, okay? But one of the things that helped the English become very powerful in the Americas was their ability to outfit their Indian allies with arms and ammunition. And so in the South, the English had a specific type of gun that they made for the Indians there called the Carolina gun. And these Indians in this particular battle, the Battle of the Blankets, were armed with those Indian trade guns, those Carolina guns. On the other hand, the Spanish allied Indians, they were primarily still armed with bows and arrows. All right, so the Spanish allied Indians had bows and arrows. Now, those Spanish soldiers, they obviously had European muskets. And I would like to mention real quick, there is some debate of whether or not the bow and arrows were inferior to muskets, okay? Bow and arrows were more, you could shoot them faster, and in a lot of cases they were more accurate. And so don't always assume that bows and arrows were a disadvantage, but Indians did seem to want muskets once they arrived in the New World, And a lot of that has to do with the power of, you know, the penetration, what the musket ball actually does when it hits its target. But anyway, as guns are introduced into the Deep South, of course, it you know, turns that war zone that already exists into a much more deadly conflict. All right. Well, this particular battle, the Battle of the Blankets, takes place in October of 1702. All right. So this force of 800, roughly 800 Spanish allied Indians, you know, that's including these 30 Spanish infantrymen. They're marching north with the intention of attacking some creek towns, and at the same time, this 1,500 man force of English allied Indians, including those 3 Englishmen and those 2 African men, are marching south to attack some of these Spanish mission Indian towns. And they run into each other on the banks of the Flint River. And here's why it's called the Battle of the Blankets. This is kind of what makes it an interesting little battle. And so the English allied Indians, they set up a camp. You know, both sides are aware that the enemy's across the river. And, you know, obviously that there's going to be a battle the next day. These English allied Indians set up their camp. And if you know anything about Native American warfare, or if you've read Robert Rogers' Standing Orders, Rogers' Rangers, you know, I was in the U.S. Army, and we had to learn Rogers' Standing Orders. But if you've ever read them, you'll know that Rogers says that Indians always attack at dawn. Rogers didn't figure this out himself. This was something well known by the colonists who fought Indians on the frontier, that Indians attack at dawn. And so these English allied Indians, they know, because they are Indians themselves, that there's likely to be an attack at dawn. And so what they did, they got up way before daylight, and they left their blankets sort of rolled up so that it looked like, in the early light of dawn, it looked like they were still sleeping. So they kept their campfires lit, and then they had all these blankets wrapped around. Now, I want you to pause for a minute and just remember, this is roughly 2,000 men here about to fight. Okay, we sometimes, because of Hollywood and things like that, we might assume, okay, there's Indians going to fight some Indians, and maybe there's, 12 or 15 or 30 or maybe even 50 guys there. No, this is close to 2,000 men, right? Maybe, if our numbers are right, it's over 2,000. But they leave their blankets rolled up in such a way, with these fires burning, that if an enemy were to attack at dawn, it would look like they were still asleep. All right. Meanwhile, these Indians and those Englishmen that are with them, they actually fall back into the woods. And so at dawn, sure enough, the Spanish Allied Indian Party has crossed the river, and they attack. All right. They fire their arrows into those blankets, and then they rush in to finish off the wounded with tomahawks. And of course, there are no wounded. These are simply rolled up blankets. However, now they are all perfect targets for the English Allied Indians, who are sitting in the woods with their trade muskets, and they fire. And once they fire, of course, the Spanish Allied Indians break and run. The Spanish officers said that that many of them ran as soon as the ambush happened. And it's estimated that at least 300 Spanish Allied Indians were killed. So imagine, 300 Spanish Allied Indians killed here all at once. And so that was the Battle of the Blankets from October of 1702. One of those cool little stories that you've probably never heard of. This Queen Anne's War in the South, it continues to rage for several years. In fact, there is a very important man at the time. His name is James Moore. He's going to end up being the governor of South Carolina. He actually leads an attack on St. Augustine, and it is unsuccessful. He's not able to capture the fort in St. Augustine, Castillo de San Marcos, but he does to burn the city. And of course, a lot of South Carolinians are mad after the fact that he wasn't able to take St. Augustine. But James Moore ends up raising another large force of Indians, and he marches south during this war, and he wreaks havoc with these English Allied Indians. He wreaks havoc on the Spanish allies, on the Spanish mission system. captures thousands of Indian slaves, burns hundreds of these little Indian villages. And James Moore becomes a very important guy. And his son, James Moore Jr., he's a very important guy in a war that comes much later called the Tuscarora War and the Yamasee War. Two more little wars that most Americans have never heard of, but they were very important to the Deep South. In fact, the Yamasee War is directly responsible for the colony of Georgia being created. In Georgia's charter, it mentions the late Indian War, the Indian War that just happened, which is the Yamasee War. And we'll probably have to do another video on that. But that Yamasee War leads to Georgia being founded. That area that we're talking about right now, that disputed zone, that no man's land, becomes Georgia, where we are right now. So I hope you like this story. I hope you learned something. I know a lot of my viewers are pretty smart, and some of them have probably heard of this before, but I'm sure some of you guys are hearing about this for the first time. And that's what I like to do. I like to teach people these little interesting things that they've never heard before. And if you like guns like this, look at my channel, because I've got a lot of videos of me shooting this thing. I've got me shooting turkey loads and musket balls, and even some crazy stuff like the Daniel Boone load. If you don't know what the Daniel Boone load is, I've got 2 different videos on it, so check that out. But if you could, please like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you.